So what you see here are many of the same features that you saw on the FAT client. So if we go into profiling, what you'll find is a listing of all of our schemas that we have in this environment, and that we can go in and inspect a schema. And we can see the same sort of metadata. So we see the summary, outliers, metadata, relationships among them. For every single column that gets profiled, it produces reports. And so we can go in and see detailed analysis of the CRM schema. So every single table in that schema has been identified. We can go in and look at a particular table, and we can see high-level view of the uniqueness of the values. So those are generally indications of depending on the type of column, whether or not it's an identifier, whether it's used for a different purpose. We can also navigate from, so what this is showing is the high-level, the keys that are used to link information together. So we're in the order details table. We can see there's also an order information table. So as opposed to the wiring diagrams that you would get if you looked at a complex Irwin diagram, relational diagram, what this does is gives you a simplified view where you can easily navigate between things that are connected, and you can inspect least occurring, most occurring values. You can see more information about the lengths. You can get information about how the data is organized.
So Bill, if I can I just highlight that aspect again?
Sure.
So I think, for members of the audience, right? I mean, what Bill showed is just absolutely remarkable, right? If you think about it, that that just by clicking on the diagram, just imagine that you can navigate across the whole ecosystem for all places that have order information, right? The idea here is that we have this ability to visually navigate through the whole ecosystem. And in that example of 35,000 databases, we can find all the places where similar information occurs. So we are not aware of other tools in the market that give you the full ability to navigate through the whole data ecosystem, right? Looking for similar models, looking for similar semantics, looking for similar values. This is just quite incredible. To do it at the scale of 10,000 or 100,000 databases. Right? So I just wanted to just make sure that I highlight that point, because for those of us who've been in data management for 20, 25 years, we've never had the ability to do these kinds of things. So and if anyone has a different opinion, would welcome questions along that direction as well. Yeah. So Bill, please continue.
Right. So our customers find this very useful. It's a simplified view. It's less complex than the desktop environment, and it's readily understandable by typical business users. We can find relationships among, so we can get an entire schema view if we choose to. So this is a view of the relationships in the schema. Of course, this is just the key values, but we can look and see also more information about those types, or we can get a view of all of the different tables that are actually part of the schema. We can shrink this down to a more reasonable size. But you can also imagine that many schemas have thousands of tables, and this becomes overwhelming, which is the reason for being able to shrink these things down. You can go into individual columns, and you again see the pieces of information that the relationships of those specific columns, and you can see more details about what are in those columns. So I'm not going to go through everything, but organize is around, oh, I'm in a different environment, sorry. I'm switching around. I've got a couple of demo environments up, and that created some confusion. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to our data quality portal so you can see an output of what comes of the data quality rules. We create a dashboard. So what you see in this chart are domains that have been identified, so city domain, and then we can click on that and we can see the rules that were associated with it. We can see the error counts. And we can go in and inspect a particular rule to see what it was that was problematic there. So the city has 4 errors on this Abbott table, and we can see what those are. And we can look at them in context of a record to be able to inspect and validate, potentially what was it that caused it to be a problem, or maybe it's not a problem. You can mark those as false positives. So I'm going to pause there. Dr. Mukherjee, would you like to add anything more about this before I go to the API discussion?
Right. So I think I would really like to highlight things that are really important in what you're showing, and look at it. If I look at it from a broad data management perspective, right? So as I said, we are right now seeing 7 domains over here in the simplified demo environment, right? But in a customer environment, we told you that we discovered 17,000 of these domains, right? So what Bill is highlighting is that we can take each one. So let's say, Bill, if we take the country name, do you have a country name? I think that's the second one, right? So
right.
That's the country name domain. It's telling us that in country names across the whole ecosystem, these are the problems, these are the rule violations that I have, right? So the concept of country is associated with a large set of rules inside global IDs, right? These are the violations that I have. And the software can go to any part of the ecosystem and say, these are the problems in this part of the ecosystem. Okay? Again, looking at the problem of quality complete across the ecosystem, as opposed to looking at it within a silo. Okay? So this is extremely powerful, right? Extremely powerful in the sense that you're no longer sort of limited to having a viewpoint or a window of visibility into one little tiny database, right? You're looking at the same kinds of problems that occur across the whole ecosystem. And these are really opportunities for SIs to go up and clean the whole ecosystem, right? So if one is to implement quality at the ecosystem level, you need something. You can go to a customer and say, oh, what's a critical data element that's important to you? Let's say social security numbers, right? You go into the social security number domain, you drill in, you say these are the rules of social security number domains, and it'll show all the violations, and then across the whole environment you'll say these are all the problems that you have related to social security numbers across all databases in the ecosystem. It's an incredibly powerful forensic tool to use from a data management perspective. Right? So I think, Bill, I just wanted to highlight that because we are very excited about providing these capabilities to our customers, right? And so if the way we look at it metaphorically is that it's like a hairball, right? Or the data ecosystem is like a hairball. There's like enormous amounts of complexity. All these threads are in this spaghetti-like environment. Everything is mixed with everything else. But Global IDs is taking out each thread one at a time and saying we can manage each thread in the spaghetti bowl or whatever, right? So it's like it gives managers of data incredible amounts of visibility, transparency, traceability, and quality. Right? Those 3 things at the whole ecosystem level, which is something that nobody else provides that we know of. Right? So I think system integrators and our partners are in a very unique position of offering something to our customers, right, that really is not available elsewhere. So I think I'll stop doing the sell job and Bill. There are a number of questions that came up from the audience, so maybe we can spend the next 15 minutes describing some of the questions that came in the chat session.
Okay.
So I think we've covered most of it, but maybe maybe Gary, does it make sense to sort of just open it up and have people just unmute everyone and then just have people sort of raise their hand and ask questions? Gary? Sorry, Gary. Gary, so does anyone have a question that they would like to sort of bring up in front of the audience? We can just unmute you and then we can hear you as you speak. So if you, I think if you raise your hand, right, then we can unmute you.
Hey, Doctor, were you calling me there?
Yeah, I was just saying that maybe we can unmute the audience, and if anybody wants to discuss a particular use case, right, or a particular question that we have not answered, maybe we can do that now. I think
Okay.
we see the most
Muted.
Okay. Okay. I just did something.
Bill, can you go over that question that says, does the parent system sit on one server or multiple servers in the client domain? If you can just bring up the architecture diagram. So, okay, somebody, Kanan Ajmera has raised his hand. So, Bill, can you unmute yourself, answer the question about topology, and then we can have Kanan ask his question? Okay, Bill, I can't hear you. So, Kanan, why don't you just ask your question?
Dr. M, I'm not sure that we could actually take questions via audio. I think we can only take them.
No, we can. I've unmuted Kanan, right? So we're waiting to hear from him. So let's see. Okay. So for some, Bill can't unmute himself. So Gary, can you just unmute Bill, please?
Okay. I will give it a try. Looks like he's self-muted.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was clicking on unmute and it wouldn't unmute me, but I'm back now. So I wasn't able to hear much of that because I think Dr. Mukherjee, you were muted for a while. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So so we had we had a question on the chat screen that talks about does the parent, where does the parent server sit? Does it sit? Does the parent system sit on a single server or multiple servers in the client's domain? So if you can just answer that question,
right?
And then after that, Kanan Ajmera, I've unmuted you, but we can't seem to hear you. So if you can just put in your question on the question screen, we'll be able to answer that as well. So Bill, why don't you go ahead and answer the question?
Yeah, so in a demo environment, or if you're just doing one database, all of this can reside on a single server. But as you start to scale up, then you want to start distributing components to allow it to have adequate resources. So the first thing you would do is you would separate the metadata repository itself onto a separate server, so that you've got one for the database and one for the application server. You can still run your habitats on that application server if you chose to, but the next level of scaling up is to say, well, I really want to add more resources to do more in parallel, so you can add more servers to run habitats on. And so that's generally how a single system scales up. But if you really want to get large, then that's the point where you start adding child servers. And in that case, you're generally running a child system on a particular server. It's got its habitat, it's got its own embedded database. These typically use Derby as their embedded database, whereas in a parent system you'd use Oracle as your primary server. But as it scales these up, it's just cookie cutter deploying new instances of the entire system.
Bill, there's another question that says, how does it work to scan complete data in the case of a billion record table?
That's a good question. So there are different agents within the system are performing different functions. So if you just imagine trying to get a row count on a billion row table, that particular query can take a while, or if it's getting that from, depending on the database, sometimes that's in metadata within the database. But every operation it's performing has different performance characteristics, and so some of it for a billion row table will take quite a long time. What we find, though, is that it's a distribution where in large enterprises you generally have most of your tables tend to be under 100,000 rows, and then it'll start to ramp up, and you'll have a few extremes that are on the billion row level, which we've profiled before. But most of them tend to be much smaller than that.
Yeah, Bill, if I can add something to that. So the idea here is that global IDs will get a full understanding of anything that contains reference data, master data, code data, etc. So any non-transaction data table is fully analyzed, and usually those tables are in the order of 10, 20 million, right? So we are able to fully analyze them. In the case of transaction records, which are in tables which have billions of records, we take a sample, right? We say that as long as we understand 10 million records, we can pretty much predict what the rest of the table is going to look like. So we don't do full analysis of billion row tables. We do the profiling and shape collection for let's say 10 million rows, and then when we do data quality, then we do it exhaustively on the whole transaction table. Right. So hopefully, okay. So that's a good question, Bill. There's a number of requests for the API discussion, and I think that would be very interesting.
Okay.
But before we do that, let me just make sure we answer the other question. Mr. Thomas Dijan Thomas asked this question: can we support it on Excel or any readable doc? So yes, we do support most formats. Excel definitely, and if the only thing that we don't have like full support for is something that cannot be converted into a tabular columnar structure. Right? So if you have a sort of pure text file, right, that cannot be converted into a tabular or columnar structure, then of course it is not made up of semantic domains, and so the software cannot work with it. We can, of course, Lucene index it, search inside it, find patterns inside textual information, but it's not tabular columnar. So generally, Global IDs works with tabular columnar, which means all forms of XML, JSON, anything that's in any database environment, etc. Right? So Hive, HBase, HDFS, Avro. So we have broad coverage. Bill, maybe you can just show all the coverage screens while I'm talking in terms of the application scanners that we have. One more question that that was asked was, can we? How is the cleansing mapped to data quality? Let me just answer. How is cleansing mapped to the quality? Like any cases are opened, and once the DQ is fixed, the cases get closed. So I think what the audience is asking, the question that is being asked is, can we do issue management related to all the cases that are open for data cleansing? And the answer is yes. So we have a issue management capability inside the software that allows us to look at issues that are created by any rule violations and the ability to see if those issues are getting closed or not. Right? So that capability does exist. I think we've answered all the questions related that have come through, Bill, except the ones related to the API. So maybe you can spend the rest of the time going through the API.
Okay, sure. So what you're seeing on the screen is using the tool Postman, which is a convenient tool for being able to work with REST APIs and be able to display their contents. So I have a particular server, a parent server in this case, it's running on the IP address, and the endpoint API v0 gives us this listing below. If I hit send again, it'll go to the server, and this is essentially giving me all the different endpoints that I have. I said earlier that all databases have a unique URL. So if I do databases, I get a listing. These can be quite large in large environments, so there's controls here for pagination. So you see 26 total databases in this environment. We're seeing 10. I can add limit equals 100, and I can see all of them, or I can change the limit to 1, and I can see one of them. I can do offset equals 5, and I can paginate through lists. So that's the general convention for going through large lists of things. I can do the same thing with schemas. So I can see all the list of schemas in the enterprise, and if I get rid of my limits, you'll see that it can be a very long list. There's 270 in this case. I can do the same thing for tables, where I can see all the tables, 486, and I can do columns, and every column is given a unique identifier. I can take and find and grab one of these, and I don't know if this one is particularly useful, but we'll do it for demo purposes. So in my URL, if I put the column identifier, I will get the metadata for it, and you'll get, if it's been profiled, you'll get richer metadata. This one doesn't look like it was profiled. Domains, so I can list all the domains that were found. There are 374. Also, there are filter parameters. So this uses convention that's used on SCIM, filter, label, contains a product, for example. So we look for all domains. You can see that we have domains like product price or product name. So we can take one of these domains and we can put its identifier in the URL. We can see the information about it. And if we do /columns, and I don't know if this particular one was mapped to columns, it was. Now we see all the columns that were mapped to the domain. So all that information that you saw about the automatic scanning and profiling and correlation, you can get through a domain. And so if you're integrating with something like a business glossary, IBM Business Glossary, Calibra, Adaptive, that this is sort of your hook into it, that they've created terms in the glossary, and that through this you can either link mechanically to the metadata, and you can pull it in and reformat within these other environments, or you can get to the report through a similar mechanism that has what we just saw earlier, that has the contents, or you can do both. There's a wide variety of things. Looks like we're almost out of time, but just to give you a view of concepts in the glossary, domains, notifications. So if you want to monitor events that are happening in the system, there's a long polling mechanism where you can open up a stream and get events such as a workflow started, a workflow ended, a new defect was found, a new domain was found, new column mapped to a domain. You can subscribe to those events. There are workflows. So in the tool, and maybe just briefly going back to the tool to show workflows, all of the processes, and out of the box you get this on the left are workflows that come with the product. But if we look at like domain column profiling, that it follows a sequence of steps. Profile columns, for each column do the domains, do whatever. And that these can be invoked also through the API. You can monitor progress through them. You can customize these workflows by adding them. They can be very complex, as this one shows. So in the interest of time, I think I'll pause here and see if Dr. Mukherjee, you want to add any final comments?
Bill, I think that's great. I think we covered the API very quickly, and the workflows very quickly. So if anyone has questions on the API or the workflow, we could certainly have a subsequent session. There are questions about the hands-on demonstration. So there's a hands-on session that you can sign up for as well, right? Where we can actually give you an environment in Amazon, and we'll walk you through how to implement the software. So everything that we described is actually fairly simple to implement, in a hands-on way. So you need really two pieces of information. You need to know how to connect to a database, and you need to know which workflow you want to run, right? So we can show you how to run those two steps, how to connect to a database or a set of databases, and how to run the appropriate workflow. And then after that, all the results that we showed on screen are generated based on these workflows. So if you know how to run the appropriate workflow, you know how to generate the results. And then if you're a programmer, you can use the API to build applications on top of the information that has been collected. So we think that this particular implementation is simple, right? And we'd be very happy to walk anyone through a typical implementation. The ability to then extract this information and build your own applications, that is very, very powerful. So with this REST API, you can build your own application. So we look forward to sort of showing you all of that in a hands-on way, assuming that you're interested. So please send us an email if you're interested in doing that, and thanks so much for your time. Gary, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. Thank you, Mr. Winkler, as well. This concludes the Global IDs Awareness webinar. We look forward to having conversations with you in the future. Thank you.